Hello, everyone. This is the Revolutionary Think Tank podcast. If this is your first time here, this is a podcast about political commentary, protest music, and revolutionary thinking. My name is 4AS, and this is my co-host, Mr. E. So, Mr. E, how are you going today?
I am very well, 4IS. How are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm going pretty well. And after last episode, you did mention Albert Einstein's Why Socialism.
Mm,
And you know what? I decided to read it. And
mm,
yes, he does have some very interesting ideas about education. And I thought it would be a
yes.
great topic to discuss today.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting how, much of his kind of philosophy, I guess you could call it, centers around the idea of education.
Hmm.
And like how he thinks it's kind of monumental to creating a good society, I guess you would call it. And in his essay, Why Socialism, I think he couples kind of the socialist society, if you would call a socialist society kind of like a planned economy. He
Hmm.
couples planned economies and improved education as like the two pillars of creating a better world. So it's interesting his whole take on it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think why it's important the way he frames it is let's do a quick divert to Albert Wenger, because I've mentioned this guy's book before, The World After Capital. But when he's discussing such ideas such as like knowledge freedom, he discusses how education systems work in the capitalist system and where he believes they should end up. And he obviously goes into the idea of the job cycle and how it works is, we sell our labor in order to buy more stuff.
Mm,
And the education system kind of feeds into those sort of ideas. Like
mm,
a classical take that you can say is the job structures with universities, and the need for to get into a job, you need a certain level of qualifications in order to do so. I remember speaking to a cousin of mine who's a teacher. um, I think maybe about like 10 or so years ago here in Australia, you could probably get a bachelor's degree and then, go and do work experience, and then you can kind of work your way up. Whereas now, I think a minimum to be a qualified professional, you need to have a master's. And it's almost as if, uh, in order to meet a job, there's like the market is kind of dictating where it's saying like, oh well, we need to uh, see who can qualify for this sort of position, and we need to cull and kind of bring the level of expertise up. But really, all that's doing is making people feed more into the system in order to minimally qualify in order to get a job to subsist.
yeah.
And that's completely different from how well, Albert Wenger, but also Albert Einstein would have envisaged things. Like,
Mm,
it's not an instrumental thing. It's not get a job in order for you to subsist, but for it to be intrinsic within itself.
mm.
And this is probably where I kind of want to bring in the quote from Why Socialism Forum, which is, I am convinced there is only one way to eliminate these grave evils, namely through the establishment of a socialist economy, accompanied by an educational system which would be orientated towards social goals. In such an economy, the means of production are owned by society itself and are utilized in a planned fashion. The education of the individual, in addition to promoting our his own innate abilities, would attempt to develop in him a sense of responsibility for his fellow men in place of the glorification of power and success in our present society.
Mm.
Now, it wouldn't be a podcast episode if I didn't do some sort of quote. But no, it's some very interesting ideas there because I guess maybe what he's kind of driving at is it's less of the um, it's less of the not what you know, it's who you know, and more of again. I'll bring Albert Wenger back because I'll probably send you the photos of these graphs that he does because when he talks about knowledge freedom and releasing us from this kind of job cycle esque model that we're currently in, with attached to education, he talks about we can have knowledge freedom by being intrinsic, where we learn, we then create, and then we share. So pretty much like think the golden age of YouTube. Like, that was the whole point, rather than what Facebook and all of that is now, which is basically keeping up with you people and then being bombarded with ads.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Let alone your phone kind of listening to you, and if you discuss a certain thing, and it's like, oh, here's the show that you wanted to see, or you mentioned that you're having a kid, and then all of a sudden, Baby Kingdom pops up on your feed.
Mm.
Like it was meant for you to share things, and maybe in a society that is intrinsically focusing on education, then you can kind of improve how you improve together with your communities, if you will.
Mm. Mm. I think there's something interesting in that quote there that I would like to unpack before you go any further down this educational rabbit hole. But
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
very first kind of line there says to eliminate these grave evils. Now, if my recollection serves me correct, for I guess the great evils he's referring to is the capitalist system,
Correct.
capitalist, yeah, and not just like the capitalist mode of production, but like the capitalist system, how it is also a set of social relations, and how which he kind of divulges a little bit more in the end part of the quote that you're talking about, but
Mm.
how it produces systems of power and domination, and then most things are driven for the sake of personal gain and greed, as opposed to any type of social ends, and like how it pits kind of class against class. So you have a dominant or a ruling class, which kind of controls information and controls the means of production, and uses that to kind of exploit and keep subservient a main group of people.
Mm.
And he discusses a lot in the essay. Like he even starts the essay almost with this kind of idea of domination of certain groups by other groups
Mm.
as a running theme throughout like complex societies and throughout history. And he describes this kind of phase that we're in our human development as a predatory phase of human development.
Mm.
And that is kind of inclusive of like I said before, all of those kind of civilized or complex societies where there's kind of class division and exploitation of certain groups in society to kind of serve a ruling class or a leisure class or
Mm.
a lucky group of individuals who get to enjoy all the wealth and the power. So like it's a big running theme, and like what you said before, I think before you actually got into the quote, even um, he doesn't exactly explain what socialism is as such as his reason for why socialism. It's more his analysis of the human condition and human society as just a natural leaning towards why socialism, if that makes sense.
Yes, but he also spends a painstaking amount of that article discussing how humans are very social creatures. Like, we wouldn't be humans without relating to each other, but also our core foundations are community based or norm based.
Yeah, but
And
that's what I'm saying. Like he's talking about the human condition there, as
yes,
opposed to explaining like, oh, this is what a socialist society is, or this is what socialism is, and this is how it would work. He's talking about the inherent and innate qualities of human beings individually and collectively, in order to paint a picture of why socialism, if that makes sense.
well, yes, because I think the reason why he did that as well is, look, we keep on coming back to this quote, but I'll tell me to stop saying it when it stops being relevant. But people can imagine the end of the world without before they imagine the end of capitalism,
Yeah, it's a
and I
great,
think that's
it's a
the reason
great
why he
concept, isn't it?
painstaking. Well, yeah, the reason why he focuses on it so much is because people are stuck in that
Yes,
mindset.
he brings it up with a very interesting story, doesn't he? Yes, that's right.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yeah. But him talking to a man on the street
No, it's a friend of his,
a
and
friend
it's
of his, yeah.
someone that he describes that like this is pretty good. I'm assuming coming from someone like Einstein, but he describes him as, a very intellectual and straightforward thinking person. So not someone who's kind of off with the fairies, I guess you would say. Yeah, and basically says that this person is kind of so disenfranchised and disillusioned with
Mm,
kind of life and society in this current age that like Einstein was basically commenting on like how uh, astonishing it is that we have made the means to destroy ourselves. And this person's like, well, like you're only astonished because you're running under the assumption that the eradication of the human race would be a bad thing. And
mm,
Einstein kind of takes this as kind of a clue and an indication that there is a problem with society because why would humans have
mm,
such a nihilistic view of themselves as a species, right? Like, why
mm,
would they hope to or kind of even promote, in a warped sense, the eradication of the human race? And he says, like, you wouldn't have had that in a discussion 100 years ago. Or about 100
yes.
years ago for him was like, he's writing this in 1950s, so in the 1850s, I guess, or even before that. So he sees that as a signature that there is an issue with the current system, and I'm assuming that is the capitalist system that we're talking about here.
Mm,
So yeah, it's interesting using talking about end of the world stuff because that's quite a poignant and a pertinent quote on the left these days. You see a lot of people commenting on that, and it comes up quite a lot. It's an interesting motif that runs around. But like you're right. Like he was thinking about that 70, 80 years ago.
yeah, and I think the end of the quote that we have here is also really important. The glorification of power and success, because look, this is technically something that Mariana Mazzucato gets into in her books, but um, whether it's companies or whether it's relationships with governments, um, the acceptance of mistakes and at least dealing with mistakes in general within society, it's almost as if, we have to be constantly perfect, but the thing is, we're fallible creatures. And when we are educating ourselves and we are at least trying to relate to the world and understand the world, we naturally make mistakes.
Mm.
And that's basically the whole concept of experience.
Mm.
So to think that your government, like, I guess maybe this is the butting heads, especially with government, of you know you're framing that you're competent, or framing that uh, you're perfect for the average citizen. You kind of have to put to the side this idea of, well, we can't we're very experienced and we never make any mistakes, but that's just not how the human experience works.
Mm.
And I think I kind of want to relate that to, as well, the concept of I'm kind of tying this to an old conversation that I had with an old teacher of mine, like an old history teacher, and he was saying, like, I remember him constantly saying in class, like, oh, you have to learn X and Y concepts, and everything else is pub trivia. So when he was talking about, like, basically cutting through the fat, whatever topic you were talking about, it was like, these are the main things that you'll have to learn for the subject. Everything else is pub trivia. And I kind of felt like, in education systems and that sort of thing, it shows what we value in certain institutions, and what we don't value.
Mm.
Like, for example, let's take something like a soft skills. It's something that's typically on a job advert, where it's like, oh, has interpersonal skills, can work within teams, and all of that. Like, I think we're bringing this back maybe to the whole baseline communism that we've talked before. It is something within our learning experiences, whether it's socially or within education systems. Like, we obviously focus on the facts, and it's like, oh, well, you need to know this jargon and this jargon and this jargon. But if you're completely socially inept, or you can't work in a team, and really you can only learn that via experience within group settings, especially in work settings, um, and especially if all of your workers can't work in that way, then you're going to kind of fail as a business.
Mm.
Even though, like, don't get me wrong, you're a specialized work. Like, for example, if you worked in a law firm, or you were part of a psych clinic or something like that, but which really you must know really specialized work, because, after all, these people work, like, what, 10 or so years in order to learn their craft. But you can unless you know these soft skills and are able to relate to people, uh, you wouldn't be able to interact and bring across that jargon, that expertise. And businesses kind of take that stuff for granted in these educational purposes or contexts.
Mm. Yeah, I think if what you're touching on there is the kind of collective nature or the cooperative nature of human beings in order to kind of produce,
Hmm.
and also thereby extension, the necessity and the complexity of the division of labor in order to produce, um, you could definitely argue that these types of things are very fundamentally human. And that's what Einstein's doing in this essay for a good
Yeah.
chunk of it. Like, at least a good page or so. It's like 5 pages, and like at least for a good page or so, he's discussing the kind of the fundamental uh, kind of dialectical actually relationship between the individual and the collective. And man is kind of both this coming together, this contradiction of his self-interest at an individual level, self-interest. So, like, that you're looking out for your own self-preservation, since you need to do that in order to survive. However, we are a social creature.
Hmm.
So, like, We are social, kind of like a bee or an ant. I think
Mm.
he makes the kind of the conclusion or the
No,
suggestion there.
no, he
Um,
does.
but the thing that he uses as a distinction between us and ants, let's say, is that they get their social and their cooperative nature from kind of this instinctual um, this instinctual relation with the world,
Mm.
a hereditary and predetermined drive, where we get our social skills and our ability to form social relationships not from a predetermined kind of social structure, but we do it in a variety of ways, and therefore to be human is the ability to change one's social relationships to improve life for us as individuals and as humans at large. And so I think he uses this kind of this understanding of what it is to be human to kind of launch one an attack on the current mode and people who think, or people who can kind of envisage the end of the world before they can envisage the end of capitalism,
Mm.
because to be human is to be able to imagine another way of organizing ourselves socially and have the ability to bring that into fruition. He was big on imagination, Einstein, and like he sees this as fundamental to our characteristics as social creatures. We create our own social structures. We're not bees and ants who live in a very rigid system of, queen and
Mm.
kind of soldiers and then worker ants or something like that. Yeah, we do have the ability to form our own social relations. And, you know, that is very important to know and to understand. It's like, I don't think people, for the most part, have any understanding of that these days. I don't think there's any acknowledgement at all, really, unless you're in some type of radical leftist circles or something like that, or you're just like you're an anarchist or something like that, where you actually believe that you can just create your own societies and people should be able to come up with new ways of structuring life and economies and societies and social groups and all that sort of stuff. It's not, I would say, common knowledge anymore. And so, like, I think that's why he makes a big point of it in the essay. And I think it's very, very pertinent for us as revolutionaries to be able to understand and grasp that concept, because the act of being revolutionary is one who it wants to enact change and can envisage a world hopefully for the better and
Mm.
wants to put that into practice. And so like it's a really interesting point which I don't think many people, one, like I said before, um, have a grasp of today, and two, would probably pick out of his essay. They probably look at the things primarily as the important takeaways. But I think his understanding that humans have this ability to change
Mm.
and imagine their change and environments in a social setting is what is just so basic to being a human, and it's a lovely idea.
Yes, but also I think the fundamental kernel of truth in why socialism is, well, basically something that we get reinforced in stories and in our world all the time, but maybe it's something that we kind of take for granted. And what you said before is quite true of I would say what we perceive as learning and education nowadays, which is rigid structures. Like, really, the only thing where I feel like there's a focus on learning, and also learning in one's own time and in own way, is, reserved for the primary slash high school as ideas of them, which is like like the Steiner and Montessori schools that you sometimes find. But these are very, rich slash specialized schools, and I think, I'm not sure whether there's even like um a university esque like version of those sort of things. I
Mm,
think that's
mm.
only really like the primary to
Yeah, yeah, it's like
maybe high
early
school.
childhood learning and
Right.
stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But like the thing is, I I'm not suggesting we did anything special, mystery, but like, for us, with everything that we've learned together, I think we were kind of on a similar path of, one day we were like, oh well, I've heard of Lenin, I've heard of Marx, I've heard of all of these leftist thinkers. I kind of think of myself as a leftist. Let me just pick up their books and have a crack.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah.
just do it. Like, I think uh, you need a lot of drive to do that sort of thing, and I guess that was going. I want to link to the idea that I had back before, is that, something that for teaching purposes in Australia, you once needed a bachelor and now you have a master's degree.
Mm,
Um, we're talking in very rigid structures, and for people to go to that Albert Wenger style of, learning, creating, and sharing, what the internet was kind of all about when it first came came
mm,
came up, like that. We reinforce the norms and our way of relating, um, based on the society that we have. Like, it's a feedback loop,
mm,
and if you're not willing as a society to promote um, learning in a communicative and collaborative way, rather than, much like a HSC exam or syllabus, you're basically just ticking off all of the boxes, and it's like, well, you know, this is pub trivia that you're learning for this year, and as soon as you're out of the exam and you got your band six, whoop, it's straight out of your head. Like, what can be reinforced that you can bring on for the rest of your life? And I do find it funny and ironic, because the thing is, let's take something like Lord of the Rings. The classic hero's journey tale. Like, we're told these sort of stories all the time of, we go through trials and tribulations and learning experiences, and we change as people. We come back to home and we are a different person because of all the experiences that we've learned. Like, we tell ourselves these stories. Why can't our education systems reflect that?
mm. Yeah, and like he kind of makes a point, I think, right at the end about our education systems. And like what you were saying before, they are geared towards creating uh, career-focused
Workers.
individuals. Yeah, and workers, money-making individuals, which is what you get in a capitalist system. Like we talk about all of this all the time, but like, the capitalist mode will produce an ideology, and the ideology is that you would then produce all the social conditions, and the formations and institutions would then reinforce that system. So in the education system, like you're talking about, this rigid tick the box kind of exercise thing, which is really just another form of consumption, as opposed to being educational for kind of just the sake of being an educational institutions, but like they produce these career-minded individuals, so workers that feed back into the system. But the types of people that are going to, like, tertiary level education, one would have the ability to go there. That's usually based on your economic status, usually, not always. And so these people that are being churned out by this educational system at the tertiary level again, are people that are probably going to be going into higher paid jobs,
Mm.
usually within the kind of the capitalist structure somewhere. And so their focus is not on like getting a good education, so like understanding their topic and being an expert in their field, as much as it is getting the piece of paper so they can go and make, six figures. And so like he believes that, I think he actually couples that in, he groups that in with his grave evils. It's not just the
Mm.
profit motive and the capitalist mode of production, but it's how we're producing armies of money-focused workers and individuals. And this is a big problem for him. And it kind of just reinforces the profit motive as the driving force for everything in society, and thereby reinforces the other issues like we talked about before, about people's complete, disillusionment with the way that the world works this day, in this day and age, and their ability, or their contentedness, to see the world end, because they just, are completely detached from it, from a social and a gratifying way. They're really detached from everything. They're alienated from the world. And like, to borrow kind of that phrase from kind of the Marxist tradition, I know it's not his exclusively, but like the structure of this essay, like you must have, I'm assuming you would have picked up on this for
Mm.
us when you read it, and I actually wanted to bring this up to know your thoughts on it. But the structure of this essay, while he does put his own spin on it, don't get me wrong, and he uses his own kind of vocab, and he describes it in his own way. This is just a very historical materialist view of society. Like the
Mm.
parallels with, Marx's historical materialism as this flows on through is just uncanny. Like really, the way he describes about like what humans are like fundamentally, talks about primitive societies and how they lead into more complex societies, the division of labor, the means of production. Like he's throwing around these terms, and like, different social groups and how these social relations
Yeah.
work and reinforce the mode of production and stuff like that. Like, I don't know why. I guess he maybe there is a reason why he'd want to separate himself from it, but like, you know, it would be so easy if he just said like, I'm a Marxist. Like, I've studied Marxism and Marx's works and all that sort of stuff, but like it just screams of historical materialism. Now, the flip side to that is this. Maybe he hasn't read any Marx. Maybe he's not a historical materialist. But if he has come to these conclusions, and if he is, as people like to label him, like the genius of our time, the man who basically changed our perception of reality, and he has come to the same conclusions as the genius himself, Karl Marx, then I'm just going to put it out there. Like, you can't like Einstein without liking Karl Marx. So sucked in all those people out there that like, call themselves, or like avid anti-Marxist slash anti-communist slash this slash, but like, appreciate Einstein. You can't have them both, buddy.
Well, yeah, but I think what you're also pointing at is how Marxism or any of the isms that are on the leftist side of the spectrum, they're all such dirty words within society. Like we've mentioned this.
But Einstein is not a dirty word. So for all these
No,
people that like
no.
to, suck up to him in some other way or another, directly or indirectly, they have to eat some humble pie because there you go. He was, I think, a historical materialist. I think he was pretty hardcore Marxist socialist, like a scientific socialist. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, like I guess I was about to bring up we've technically mentioned it before, but with David Harvey when he was discussing on his anti-capitalist chronicles the whole idea about totality and how he was discussing with government officials about how to deal with housing in the area and about the totality of how businesses work and also real estate agents and blah blah blah. And he was giving his as a hardcore Marxist and historical materialist, he was giving his solution as to how to do everything, and they were like. He obviously didn't say he was a Marxist at the time. He was just
No,
giving it as
yeah,
an
yeah.
expert, as an academic expert. And the government officials were like, "Oh my god, this sounds amazing!" Like,
Wasn't it
like
also not just a government official, but like the head of like, I don't know, a bank or something like that?
yes, it was. And they were like, "Oh, this sounds amazing. These are great ideas." And then like furiously like jotting it down, blah 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 blah. And they were like, "Oh, you're such an expert on this. Where did you get these ideas from?" And like he even said like he stopped for like a hot second and was like, should I really tell them where I got it from? And then and then he was like, I might as well just tell the truth. And he's like, "Oh well, from Karl Marx. It's straight from his Grundrisse and Das Kapital." And they were like, crunch up piece of
Yeah.
paper, throw it away.
Yeah, like their jaws dropped and hit the
Yes.
floor, and they were just like, "My God, we just enjoyed Marx," like kind of thing. And
Yeah,
then
yeah.
they crunched up their piece of paper and wanted to have nothing to do with David Harvey after that. Yeah, which is hilarious, right? And that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Like Einstein is like David Harvey in this case. He is really advocating for a Marxist kind of analysis of the social system. And like the added flavor that he puts in is the focus on education.
Yes.
When I'm not sure, I haven't read everything of Marx's, but I don't know if he puts as much as an emphasis on education as Einstein has here. That seems to be his kind of real contribution to this socialism conversation.
Mm.
So I think why socialism is, yeah, like I said right at the start, is like kind of an exploration of the idea of a socialist society or a new and improved society, with the two pillars being a planned economy and an improved education system. One that is education for the sake of actually educating people
Mm.
as opposed to producing armies of career-minded and money-focused individuals, which just perpetuate the system.
Well,
But
yeah,
like,
but it basically feeds into Karl Marx's idea in Das Kapital of the reserve army
mm,
of workers. Is that yeah, okay, sure. I think probably back in his time, it's more it's more focused on the factory workers and the booms and busts of of the capitalist cycle.
mm,
But at least when you make the education system a market now, and
mm,
it's basically supplementing into that, you sell your labor and you create more stuff. The create
yeah,
more stuff is not only the commodities and the goods that are there, but education is a good because
yes,
it leads back to the golden age of 40 years of your You have a good, you have a good education, you get a good job, and then you get your white picket fence with 2.5 kids in the suburbs.
Yeah.
And it's been tied to having a good education is tied to the Australian and the American dream.
Mm,
And um, the question is, do we exist in that world anymore?
mm,
Especially when you need to up the qualifications in order to sift out the bad workers from the good workers.
mm, mm.
Yeah, theoretically speaking,
Yeah.
but though you did raise another good point, though really I think that's a topic for another time, which was planned economies, because I really think that deserves its own episode, really.
Can we just before we wrap up here, there is something that's very interesting at the end of his essay.
Yeah,
Um, on planned economies. Let's not go into the details of what a planned economy is as such, but
yeah.
he warns against planned economies. It's not all sunshine and rainbows and
I,
lollipops for him.
yeah, I did notice that. Yeah,
Yes,
keep
yeah.
going. Yeah.
He doesn't critique on education and what the importance of education, but it does critique on the dangers of planned economies and how they lend themselves to kind of what someone like Buchanan would call the state and authoritarian left, or red authoritarianism. But he talks about in a planned economy the need for a strong centralized bureaucracy to kind of control the means of production and control the planning of economics and distribution and all that sort of stuff, and how that can lead to the complete enslavement of the individual. So this would be kind of a hyper or extreme version of socialization and collectivism. If
Hmm.
you take that to the extreme, and you negate the individual, and you suppress the individual and the individual's freedoms and desires, and needs. And so he does offer some light though, and he says kind of something along the lines of um, any society seeking to be kind of or having the perfect combination of a planned economy with good education system would need a proper democratic counterweight to balance out the power of a centralized bureaucracy, because centralized bureaucracies do have kind of that unfortunate drive towards domination and the
Hmm.
suppression of people and culture. So yeah, like I said, it's not all just planned economies are just the most amazing thing since sliced bread. He definitely recognizes there is a danger in that too, just as much as there is a danger in the capitalist mode of production in terms of domination through class control. He's worried about, like I said, a centralized bureaucracy just um, putting everyone under the thumb and exploiting people in the same way. So
Hmm.
it's interesting, and I think it is a good point, because if this is written in the 50s, then he would probably be commenting on what he would be seeing in socialist economies, right?
Hmm.
I'm assuming this is a critique of that to some extent.
Oh yeah, like I guess
A
this is this
Soviet
peak.
experiment,
Yeah,
I'm
it's
assuming.
probably peak Stalin, right?
Well, yeah, I'm assuming that's what
Yeah.
that he's what he's critiquing when it comes to planned economies, is that there is um, a inherent risk to the individual, and democracy is still important. Actually, it's the only thing that can withstand the force of centralization is
Hmm.
the democratic counterweight, which is very, very. It's interesting because yeah, you can kind of go down the path as a socialist of just thinking that planned economies are the be all and end all, and the ends justify the means in all cases.
Mm.
And so, like, you like, who cares about kind of consensus and democratic modes? Really, those are liberal ideologies and bourgeois notions. And like, if you really want a just society, at the end of the day, just centralize everything and plan it, and nationalize all the industries and such, and that'll do the trick. But there is a risk in that. Like, once you hand over kind of power to one, to the bureaucracy of some sort,
Mm.
that's a form of absolutism. And with absolute power, it corrupts absolutely, as the saying goes. I think we've dropped that one a few times in this podcast too, for us.
Well, that's not the quote I thought you were gonna do. I thought you were going to say, "As we all know, only Siths deal in absolutes." But I was wrong on that one.
Yes. Um, but yeah, so it's a pertinent warning. While he's setting up the entire essay as to why this is such a good thing, he's not as stupid as to say that it's infallible.
Well, yeah, I thought it was very very smart that he put a point of clarification that
Mm,
yeah, like this is a good idea, but uh, it can get out of hand.
yeah, yeah, very interesting. It's definitely not the kind of idealistic slash utopian form of socialist justification that you hear out of most of its proponents. Is
Hmm.
They usually don't go down the path of critiquing it at the same time, if you know what I mean. If they're going to advocate for it, they just go all out and they don't offer a warning, let's say. But he does.
Well, it probably shows how smart he was.
Mm, mm.
And with that, felt like we've had a good discussion today. And the last segment, as always, what's that synthwave art? So for this one, it was Albert Einstein educating the people.
I
Uh,
don't see any people.
I know, but like I think that's the whole point of the books that are kind of floating into the air.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I agree with you. Unless the books are supposed to be symbolic of people.
It's quite a lazy AI art, this one. Like, isn't there a really famous picture already of Albert Einstein sitting there like that, writing at his, bureau somewhere,
Yeah, I think
pen
so.
in
Yeah,
hand. Like,
yeah.
I'm just going to put it out there that the AI was incredibly lazy this time, and like, it's
Not
just put some nice synthwavy kind of colors on it, and was like, yeah, that'll do. So I think AI has now reached the point for us where it's become complacent, and it needs to be shut down for a while, in order to rethink its position in the world. It's just it's getting lazy.
right. I'll speak to Sora OpenAI then.
Yeah, yeah,
Mystery.
please have a
Yeah,
chat.
yeah.
Have a
Have a chat.
chat.
Have a chat.
Tell him
Yeah.
tell him I'm not happy.
Okay, fair enough. And with that, everyone, remember to like, share, and subscribe if you really like this video today. And remember to keep thinking and keep learning. And to sign us off, I'll give it to you, Mystery.
Thank you very much, 4AS, and to all of you out there. Please remember, I am, you are, we are a mystery.